Good morning, afternoon to everyone, maybe even potentially evening, depending on where you're joining us from. But hello to everybody. So welcome to our, pardon me, welcome to our first PSC Diversity, Equity, Equality, and Inclusion webinar event of the year. This is going to be called Creating Thriving Environments for Diverse Talent in Pre-Sales. We've got an excellent panel for the discussion today. And as part of our welcome, my name is Ash Davis. I am a pre-sales practice lead at Red Hat. I'm also a member of the PreSales Collective DEEI Council, and I'm very excited to be part of this conversation today. Our first sort of welcome and our first poll is going to go out for everybody. What option best describes your current role? We like to know who we're talking to. We like also to know generally what the reach of these events is. And this helps us make sure that we have the most well-targeted and most valuable events for everybody. And also we want to say a huge thank you to all of you. We're really excited that everyone is here joining us today. Thank you in general for being part of the PreSales Collective. It's a collective of individuals. So we appreciate each and every one of you for your contributions, for your time, especially the panelists. Thank you panelists for being with us today, and those like Shauna, who are on the back end making things happen. This is a huge group effort. Thank you to everybody who helps make it happen. And then how to get the most out of today's webinar. So we have Q&A. Please feel free to use that Q&A. We're going to take some time toward the end of the panel discussion to make sure that we have time for Q&A. So we're going to get to those questions. And then also, please be active in the chat. Continue this conversation. Have it going off on the side. That's totally fine. And then, I generally recommend take some notes on these kinds of events when you want to be able to remember something later. I like to have a couple of notes that help me remember what exactly I learned when I attended a webinar. So with that said, let's roll into a quick introduction here. We can start with Zoe.
Hey everyone, I'm Zoe Gonzalez, Solutions Consultant from Gainsight. I am based in New York City, but I am actually calling in live from Hawaii. So aloha to everyone. And I've actually only been in pre-sales for about 8 months. I recently made the transition from an IT and post-sales background in tech. Nice to hang out with y'all.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Tejas?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tejas Saraya. I lead our sales engineering team and technical partner management team for the Americas for UiPath. And I've been in the pre-sales profession now for coming up on 15 years. So it's awesome to see the PreSales Collective, the work that's going on here, and very excited about this topic in particular. It's very important to me. And I'm based in the Bay Area, California.
Awesome, awesome. And Amber?
Hello, everyone. I'm Amber Fallon, a member of the PreSales Collective, and I also serve on the board of DEI with Ash. I'm a sales engineer at Ometria, and I've been a sales engineer for about 7 years now, and I am absolutely thrilled to be speaking today about a topic I am super passionate about.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. So as I said, this is the first PSC DEEI event of the year. Our theme this year for DEEI is continuing the conversation. So we began our conversation last year with the formation of our council, our first sets of webinars, some of the blog content that's gone out. We were asking provocative questions. We were getting the conversation going. We want to focus this year on continuing that conversation and not dropping any of that conversation and any of the progress that's been made. So we hear a lot about creating inclusive and safe spaces, improving diversity, creating healthy working environments. These have sort of become, at this point, buzzwords, and they pervade modern work culture. But we want to take a moment to talk about what does it mean to have an environment in which everybody truly thrives, where diversity and a healthy working environment is table stakes, and where we've really created an environment where people are thriving. So on today's panel, we're going to discuss just that, some of the high and low-level changes that we can make to our businesses, our work cultures, and maybe even ourselves to create an environment that is fit for all pre-sales talents to find that thrive. This is an excellent learning opportunity as well as a chance to connect and network with others who are working on these issues in pre-sales. In the spirit of keeping the conversation going, please do keep the conversation going. Like I said, utilize that chat, utilize those Q&A, that Q&A function for us. And with that, I think we can move on into our panel discussion. So our first question, what do we mean when we say diverse talent? Maybe we want to start with you, Zoe.
Thanks, Ash. So first thing that comes to mind for me when we say diverse is representation. Now, as a woman of color, my reality, right, is representation from that physical aspect. But as we all know here, right, there are a lot of different layers to identity and representation. It can be anywhere from gender identity. It could be from your work experience. So like something as simple as after I graduated college, I used to work at the mall and eat Panda Express. Like, to me, that's right, like diverse. What's your background on top of all of these other great ways to identify?
That's awesome. Tejas and Amber, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I think, when I think about diverse talent, I think about, as Zoe said, there's diversity of backgrounds. There's the things we maybe commonly think about around gender identity, and but there's things like sexual orientation. There's what ages, right? Generations. There's diversity of work experiences. I also think about maybe a little more subtle things like are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Cultural differences, language differences. I mean, there's a whole bunch of dimensions to this that. When I think about building a diverse team and the team of people I want to be surrounded by, I just want as many different perspectives as I can get.
I absolutely agree. I think diverse perspectives bring so much to the table. Having people with diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences in all walks of life, where they grew up, how they were raised, what challenges they've had to face and what ways they've had to overcome them. Those can really impact a business in a very positive way when you have problem solving or troubleshooting or just different angles and different approaches to the way the business operates.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that perspective. So what do we mean, what does a thriving work environment look like? Maybe I want to start with you, Tejas.
Yeah, sure. I think sort of the corollary to that is to me creating an environment where people with diverse backgrounds or diverse perspectives can do their best work. And I think that means being able to kind of just be yourself and bring your whole self to work. And this notion of kind of like being able to bring your perspective without fear of judgment. So it starts kind of at a baseline with psychological safety and being able to come with ideas and perspectives that you don't feel are going to be judged or somehow dismissed. But I think even beyond that, right, to create a really thriving environment, taking it to the next level of not just the safety, but then how do you create this sense of belonging where, really you have a community of people that you can share ideas with. And, we'll probably talk more a little bit about how we do that, but I think it's really just being able to be yourself at kind of the most basic idea.
I love that. Any other thoughts, Zoe?
I was just going to say, like as an individual contributor, it goes back to that kind of being 100% unapologetically you. I think creating that safe space where you can show up 100%, but it's also super important to have kind of systems in place, or I like to say kind of like management, leadership, someone that's helping to champion, right, that thriving environment. As again, a woman of color, I know what it's like to just feel like, am I fully supported? Now that I've found a role where I have that, it's just, it's been night and day. So the importance of just having someone to champion you is a world of difference as well.
That's beautiful. Yeah, we often talk about that there being a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. Mentorship is very useful having somebody to tell you what to do. It's much better when someone will walk you into the room, right? Yeah, that's a good point. It's part of that importance.
Ash, can I just add to that? I think that point about having a champion is really, really important. And I think about that for my organization. I think about it as, the SEs bring a very unique perspective to the table for all the reasons we just talked about, right? And having that top-down support of, hey, like, you have permission to express these ideas. People want to hear these ideas, either within the organization or outside the organization, I think is really important. So thanks for bringing that up, Zui.
Yeah, that's awesome. So speaking of, what are some of the systems that are unique to pre-sales that contribute negatively or detract from thriving working environments?
So Ash, I just wanted to jump in because it's super interesting. I know we just were talking about, these, like hierarchies in the workplace, having a champion. Granted, you can 100% be a champion for your other coworkers, no matter what your title is, but there is that reality in terms of meritocracy. I know that everyone on this panel, we kind of had a discussion about this before, and being, again, a woman of color or anyone from a underrepresented community, there is this reality of you looking from the outside in, even starting off in tech. Like I talked about this in the beginning of the panel, but I used to work at the mall. I like to tell people that I ate Panda Express, but a lot of my choices to get into tech were very calculated to the point where it's like, what is this logo I'm working at? It's not just, any store at the mall, it's the Apple store. It's kind of building up these credentials. And one of my good friends actually that's attending right now, her name's Laura. We had this discussion about, she's a Black professional in pre-sales, of this kind of just almost like pressure to seem like, okay, I have to have all of my buttons tied up. I have to look and meet these expectations. And ultimately, I feel like I am catering to, right, what is the definition of sales and tech from like white male leadership. And that's just this struggle, I feel, but also a superpower that, again, everyone from underrepresented communities have, is this power of adaptability. So I kind of get upset when people are like, oh, you just need like grit. It's like, no, we've had that since day one, right? Just trying to navigate through this space. But that's just something I wanted to call out.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I think those are really, really great points. I think for me, the thing that jumps out at me around some of the systemic or systematic things, one is I think that our profession suffers from a really high degree of selection bias. So for two reasons. One is there's a certain sort of demographic that's already the predominant part of this, namely a lot of male folks that are in the profession, and so as a result, that can lead to some biases, which we can talk more about in terms of like how do we shape the interview process and things like that. But the other one is like I think everybody sort of has their story of how they stumbled upon pre-sales as a profession, right? It's like, oh, it's the best kept secret. And I have that story, right? And I'm sure many others do, of like, I didn't even know this profession existed. And I think what that does is it leads to a certain type of individual who, quote unquote, stumbles upon it, meaning there's somebody who, maybe they were put in a position where they got exposed to that type of role and that's how they found it, or maybe they have a friend who was in that role and that's how they found it, whatever the case may be. So I think the fact that our profession is not as, sort of well known to folks that are just starting their careers leads to this sort of domino effect down the line. So that's one thing that jumps out at me on this. And then the other part is we are ambassadors for our companies with our customers, and so part of this is on, I think, companies to think about that, like what do we want to be putting out as a company to represent who we are. And I think now more and more companies are getting it. I'm proud that UiPath is doing a bunch of stuff around belonging and justice and equality. but like not every company I think has gotten to that point where there's a recognition that like this is actually the face of who we are putting in front of our customers. So so those are a few things that I think about on this.
If I can just jump in really quick, one of the things that I find really unique about pre-sales in regards to that is we're at a Venn diagram. We stand right in the middle between tech and sales. And both tech and sales have that reputation of being traditionally very male and traditionally very white. And that does create a little bit of a nexus of pre-sales where we sort of straddle both lines, and both lines sometimes it feels like are kind of targeting us.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. And you brought up something too, Tejas, which is that we are the face of our organizations to our customers, where our customers may also be anywhere on the DEI journey, right? And I mean, so it's sort of like the question is, at what point does a company stop pulling SEs from accounts where they're being traumatized and start talking to those customers and saying, stop traumatizing my employees? We're not there yet in most organizations, but that's one of those things, right? Yeah, that the whole interaction between us and our customers and the that sort of instinct, that almost in compelling urge to keep status quo so we can continue making profit. All this seems to be very sort of anti that point. I think all of us know that that's not necessarily true, and actually not even close to supported by data. But that's the struggle. So then, sort of with that in mind, can you name some examples of successful initiatives that you've witnessed, either at your organization or another one that you've worked with, that support excellent company environments?
So I have two things. I did want to highlight something that I witnessed from like my manager. So we have weekly team calls, and we usually have like a mini icebreaker, right? So we can learn about each other. And actually one of my teammates, who's also a member of PSC, Brian Din, he had this response that really kind of resonated with me. Or let me just backtrack a bit. The icebreaker was, what did you want to be when you grew up? You know, we all went around saying this, and Brian, fellow colleague and also member of PSC, had a very interesting response where he kind of said, you know, as a son of Vietnamese immigrants, I wasn't actually thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up. I was just thinking, how can I be more American, or how can I make more friends? And like, one, to be able to say that in a space, I think is like, one, for some people, they couldn't do that. I loved that about it. What my manager did was, and he's so great at this, shout out to Matt Middleton, who's currently on paternity leave with his new son, but was that he kind of like stopped and he listened. And he's done this with me before too, because I feel safe going to him, talking about certain just interactions I might have had in the workplace. And he just asked this open-ended question, right? Like, how did that make you feel? Right. And then afterwards, he validated, you know, that experience. First, he listened, he didn't judge, anything like that. Like, that's just one way to, right, show support, compassion, foster that kind of dialogue. And also it was like a nod to say like, hey, you know, this is someone's experience, we're going to honor that. But aside from employee resource groups, we call them TRGs over at Gainsight, we actually had a woman, she's a professional at Discovery, come and speak to our BIPOC DEI leadership team for our TRG. And she mentioned just something as simple as, you know, having members of, you know, certain communities have that voice at a table. We always talk about having like, you know, like committees or boards. It's like, sometimes you might want to run something by, let's say, you know, the Black community, or, you know, the LGBTQ community, before saying like, is this appropriate, or are we hitting the mark on this? And at Discovery, she works in production, basically found out that there were a lot of things wrong with just how content was being delivered, music choice bias, And what was just great was it created this opportunity to give Black creatives more opportunity, access to make those decisions in regards to, okay, this HGTV episode that's rolling out. It's like, can we have like a hip hop kind of soundtrack instead? But those are just some examples.
That's great, though. Thank you for those examples. Tejas or Amber, any additions to that?
I don't think I could say it any better than Zoe had.
That's wonderful.
One thing I'll add to that, I think those are all great ideas. I mean, I think all of us are searching for more of these things we can do. I know UiPath, and even at my previous company, this concept of belonging has become a bigger part of the narrative, which I think is really important. So just having that type of initiative, I feel it's more comprehensive. One thing though is like anything that can help to build empathy with other groups, I think is a really good use of time and energy. And so, you know, at our company, we have volunteer days where people can go and volunteer in things. And I think using that coupled with like, hey, take this opportunity to go and get exposure to something that maybe you don't get exposure to on a regular basis. I think that empathy goes a long way of just trying to like start with a desire to understand and learn. So that's one other idea I think is pretty cool.
That's awesome. So as we know, organizational culture, the first time that somebody really begins to have and like begins to encounter it, really begins at the hiring process. It begins probably really the first time you either talk to a recruiter or see a job description on a website, long before you talk to anybody at the company. So can we talk about some ways where we can make our hiring processes more equitable? And what does that look like on a tactical level? What are maybe some things we can actually do to change that organization?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one. This one is one I feel really passionate about, and you know, always searching for better ways to do it. I think that some of the things I think about here, one is like there's a few phases to this. As you said, the job description and how you put that out there is number one. You know, I think there are like inherent biases in the way job descriptions are written, and there's now tools and things to help mitigate some of that. Where the jobs are actually posted and who knows about them, like we talked about this earlier, right? The best kept secret in terms of a profession also means it's very, very hard to get in front of audiences that are more diverse and could bring different perspectives to the profession. It's something that honestly I've struggled with for the past several years. And so, you know, we're trying different things in terms of looking for groups that we can partner with to do that, but it's tough. I think that PreSales Collective is starting to help a little bit there. The interview process itself, I think one of the things we can control the most of is like, I believe in having a very structured interview process where the rubrics are predefined. You have usually 4 interviewers that, you know, each one focuses on a different area. And I think the reason that's important is it reduces some of the unconscious bias of folks coming in to do the interview, because you're giving them very specific things to think about and ask about. And, you know, I'll even challenge people of like, they'll give a perspective on a candidate and I'll say, that's great, but how did they perform relative to the rubric, right? And like when you ask it that way, I think it starts to put the focus on the right things versus a bunch of the biases that might come into the process. Having a diverse interview panel is important. So like, I think there's different phases or different things at each of these phases, and they all sort of multiply one way or the other to make a more balanced or less balanced process.
Yeah, it's a good point. When your first introduction to a company is the people that they choose to put in a room to interview you. If it's completely homogenous across the board, that says something about the company. I agree. It makes a big difference to be represented when you are being interviewed. So, Zoe, you have some thoughts on
Sorry,
that?
I did just want to add in terms of like something as simple as like Kay just mentioned, the job description. I was talking with one of my colleagues who is part of the LGBTQ plus community, and something as simple as, hey, why don't we post if there is, right, a gender neutral healthcare offering? What does that look like? And it kind of feeds into this approach that I love. I call it the Riri Fenty Beauty approach, where when she came out with all of her, shades of foundation, there's no place that she plastered now, all inclusive, right? It was visual, it was there, it was accessible, and it was just, right, that visibility that comes across again through the people that you're speaking with, the recruiter. I can proudly say some of the best conversations I've had when I was even interviewing in the pre-sales process were with women or with other people of color. I'll never forget when one recruiter, salary range, that's something that's super sensitive to everyone, right? And I'll never forget this recruiter straight up told me was, I'm just going to put you like, this is the range. I'm going to put you for the highest range. And that's that. And he was also a person of color. And that's just feedback I gave to him because I never felt so seen, or just he understood, like the gravity of the situation or how to ask. It goes back to that adaptability piece. I think the reality is some people are hesitant to bring up their identity first thing in the interview process, but I think that's something that you need to look for when you're interviewing, trying to find your work environment, right? Do they appreciate you for who you are? Do they meet your values, etc.?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, this is usually the first stop on the journey for people. One of the first things they'll do is say, all right, fine. Well, we don't have a lot of diversity around here. Let's start hiring diversity. One of the first places people look. So I think it helps a lot to have these tactical, some of the things we can do. I'm going to throw in one additional, just remove any requirement of having gone to college. But the vast majority of the diverse talent that we want has not gone to college. And frankly, some of the most successful people I know in pre-sales have degrees that are not in a relevant field. Mine's not in a relevant field. My degree is in philosophy. It doesn't matter. So I just strongly encourage us to let go of the importance of the college degree because it doesn't really matter in pre-sales. We don't need that. We're not PhDs. We're not doing science experiments all day long, right? We're solving tomorrow's challenges today. There is no degree that can get us ready for that. So I strongly encourage at least moving away from things like that, and also, maybe divest a little bit in the amount of time you might expect somebody to have had experience before coming in. There's a lot to be said about taking in talent that looks on paper, taking in that talent that looks maybe a bit underqualified, and building them up to the person that you need. Often that they end up becoming way more successful than hiring the people that looked great on paper. That's been my personal experience. So
I just love that, Ash. I'm sorry. Like, I know everyone here is probably so ready to dive into all of this, but I'm going to be mindful of time.
Ash, that's I think really well said. And I think like there's actually, irrespective of trying to build a diverse team, which is extremely important, just the simple war for talent, I think, warrants what you just said, right? Which is like, hey, if I don't have an open mind on who I'm going to bring into the organization, I just simply won't be able to get enough talented people, period, right? And so I think that there's a very direct line to the business outcomes for doing that. So I think that's a really good point. One thing I wanted to mention was tactically, unconscious bias training for the interviewers, I think, is really good. We haven't done this yet at UiPath, but it's coming, guys. But when I was at Google, we did this, and it was really eye-opening, frankly, for me when I went through it, because there's so many biases that I certainly saw as I was going through that I was bringing into the interview process, which I think just being conscious of, or more conscious of it, is really valuable.
Yeah, I think conscious, that's the important thing. Speaking of being conscious and or self-conscious, what do you think folks have, like, what are the biggest fears people have when talking about or looking to implement changes around DEI?
If I can jump in on this one, I think a lot of people are afraid about what they might say the wrong way, if they might come across the wrong way, they might use the wrong words and inadvertently offend someone. And I think there's a lot of fear around having those conversations and starting those conversations, even at just a base or organization level, because there is that sort of hesitancy around, I don't want to offend anybody, I don't want to say the wrong thing, I might not know what someone else's lived experience is like, and I might be afraid it's a sensitive topic and I don't want to ask them. And I think that just sort of creates this sort of ball of almost anxiety and inner fear that stops these conversations before they can start.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah, that fear of tripping over ourselves is a big one.
Yeah, I got to tell you, like, coming into this panel, I was probably more, I was just very thoughtful about what I wanted to say here, and you know, wanted to come in prepared because it's a very important topic, right? But I think that part of that is also this feeling of like, hey, I don't want to say the wrong thing, and I think just having the conversation is so important, and that fear of like saying the wrong thing, if that's holding it back, I think that's a problem we should try to get past, right? It's a dialogue, it's a constant learning process. And so, you know, certainly that's the approach I want to be taking in these conversations, is like, I definitely don't have the answers, but I'm here to learn and to hear and to listen and continue to get better. And so, you know, I think that can be something that holds a lot of people back. I know it held me back for a long time. But as I started to put more out there around it and just have more conversations about it, it was really powerful.
Yeah, for sure. So for those who are in positions of leadership, maybe anywhere from manager to vice president level, what is one thing a leader can do today to make a more inclusive environment for their team?
Yeah, I guess I can jump in on this one. I think really I think it starts with me, like in a lot of the way I think about this, which is if I am having, like, creating the space for people to have this type of conversation, if I am making it a priority for my team and particularly my leadership team to be demonstrating these behaviors, am I constructing a team that is a diverse team? Like, those are things that I think about that I can be doing within my organization. And then, you know, certainly advocating for those things in other teams, advocating for some of the process level or policy level things in the organization. You know, case, like I mentioned, the interviewing process, right? That's something that before I joined UiPath, there was a certain way that it was done, and that was effective. There were some changes that we wanted to make. We made those changes within the organization, but then also explaining to my peers and other leaders in the organization why we did that, I think is important.
I think it's really important for leaders to be involved and start the conversations. You know, be present, be with your team, open a dialogue, and just share that you're there and that those conversations are something that you welcome and will actively participate in. I think a lot of people look to leadership as an example of how things are going to go at a company, especially if they're newer to the organization. You kind of almost like tentatively tip your toe in the water to see how things are going to react. And if you see someone in leadership just being open and having dialogues, it just creates this sense of comfort, the sense of, okay, well, I can share my feelings. I can be part of this group. I don't have to hide, like Zooey said earlier, part of who I am. I'm not hiding that away because I feel comfortable expressing that.
So thank you for that. What are some of the damaging practices then that companies can, in other words, like what are some of the things that are commonly damaging that companies do that make it difficult for employees to thrive?
think siloing, not just in information, but like forming in groups and making people feel just like they don't belong or that they don't fit, even if it's just something at a very surface level. I think that can be a big challenge for newer employees or for employees of diverse backgrounds. And it's not always intentional. It can just sometimes be like almost like a high school clique kind of a situation where the cool kids do this activity. And then that forms out groups and in groups, and it creates this environment of just unspoken tension and this undercurrent of not quite belonging or not quite fitting in. So a thing that you can do to counteract that is to make sure that if there are groups or committees within your organization, they're well publicized, new hires are informed of them. There's not this like secret back alley where stuff is getting done and nobody knows. Transparency is huge in that regard.
I did just want to add another thing in terms of, right, anyone that is from an underrepresented community, making sure that you're also not leaning on, you know, tokenism or, okay, Zooey, you represent, you know, Asian Americans. It's your responsibility to share, you know, your trauma, your past, or how should we do this? There are so many professionals out there that you can pay that are also part of these marginalized groups. Again, it's just this other, it might not be, what's it called? How can I, intentional, but it is something I know for a fact that I've experienced, other people I've worked with, we talk about it at work, have experienced, where we feel like there is this burden that's also given to us. We're trying to thrive, but then we're also responsible. Like, Tejas, like you even saying like you were so mindful, and I know everyone on this panel was so mindful about like coming here on this, like on this dialogue. Like, I just want to say the right thing because I like, you want to represent on behalf of, you know, these communities or your personal experience as a leader in management. And I just love Shauna, again, who put together this panel. When she was walking me through this, she's like, Zooey, you don't have to be validated for why you're here. You know, you are here for a reason, same reason everyone is attending for a reason. You all belong here.
Yeah, I think that's and thanks, Zooey, for that. And I think that this, what you were just saying is like putting the burden of helping to solve these problems or maybe solving these problems on the underrepresented groups is a mistake. And I think that that's something that I think it's an easy thing to sort of fall into, which is like, hey, you know, you're most familiar with the problem, therefore maybe you should help to solve it. I think that helping and contributing to it is part of it, but I think that trying to put that burden on each of those groups is a, you know, it's something, it's a trap that I think a lot of organizations could fall into. So something, you know, to watch for and try to be mindful of.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think actually I'm going to reorder our questions here a bit, but let's say how can an individual contributor contribute to creating a thriving working environment? What is something that that every employee, regardless of rank and power in an organization, do to create a thriving work environment?
So I'll jump in on this one. It's a very cliched answer, but I love it. And I try to do it in my own life. Be the change you want to see. Model the behaviors that you want others to do. So if that involves, you know, putting yourself out there, joining organizations, having dialogues, getting things going, sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable as an individual contributor to do those things yourself. But if you start doing it, other people will start doing it too. Start organizations, start dialogues, start having those talks with other people, and make it just normal. It's just a totally normal thing to start having conversations, to start doing things, having activities and events, and all of these other things balloon from that. So be who you wish your coworkers were.
I think, Amber, taking that to the next level, in terms of being an individual contributor myself, we all obviously have our own unique strengths. This also sounds very cliche, but leaning into your strengths. I bleed extrovert. So any chance that I can, you know, maybe like say something on behalf of someone else who might not feel comfortable, Or, you can be an introvert, that's fine. How can you use like your knowledge to maybe give out this knowledge share? Like one of my favorite things on LinkedIn is just seeing the amount of thought leadership around DEI and B work. So something I do randomly, like I'll post in Slack, like, oh, we should use POC stock images run by people of color, make sure this is more in our marketing campaign. Tejas also talked about dedicated resources, like there are great communities such as like Hue for people of color, there's Tribaja for Latinx, there's also, I believe it's like for mothers who are trying to break back into space, into the workspace. I forget what it's called, but I can get you that. Sometimes it's just passing information along. I've unapologetically also just put that in Slack channels, marketing, send to leadership, or how about we try this? So lean into your strengths. Like how can you best kind of promote that change you want to see?
Yeah, I would just want to chime in on this one for when I was in IC, I actually at that time in my career, I honestly didn't put as much thought into this topic as maybe I should have, or if I did, I could have made more of an impact. But I think that just being supportive of the people around you as your team members is an important thing you can do. And then the other thing, like at UiPath, we have this concept of sphere of influence for the individual for all the team members, which is like, how do I have a multiplicative impact on the organization? It doesn't have to be just around the products and the technology and the knowledge. It can be around topics like this as well. And how are you helping to bring all the people around you a step forward?
I do want to just say one thing, Tejas, please do not apologize for like, how you were just saying like, oh, this wasn't a thing, like, and my reality too, this was not something that was talked about. It's something that I was always passionate about, but I never had that space. And all that matters is, like, it's for everyone on this call, it's like, wow, we are in this space where we can talk about this freely. So don't ever be like, apologize for what happened before, because we're only about going forward, only way but up, baby. Yeah.
Thank you, Zoom.
Right.
Appreciate that.
Well, that's fabulous. Thank you for all your time in answering these questions. So we have some audience Q&A as follow-up to this. I think actually this conversation goes very well into the first question, which is excluding organizational changes and processes. What can an individual do to drive change? I'm a woman, and although I would love to get my company to run campaigns to get more women, I know it's a long journey. What can I do on a personal level?
I kind of answered this one like typing already, but I think the most important thing that you can do is join professional organizations, like, for example, the PreSales Collective. I'm also a member of the National Association of Women Sales Professionals, which is a great organization too. Join organizations like that. And then there's this sort of two-way sharing that happens where you can learn things from other shared experiences in those groups and bring them back to your company. And then when you have job postings or just candidate information to share, you can share it with them and encourage people from those organizations to apply or join your company. So it's kind of a great two-way street, and it really, really helps.
Yeah, I love that, Amber. And I think on that personal level, it's just continuing to do the work and write what feels good for you. I love podcasts. There's this great podcast, I think, that LinkedIn produces called Brown Table Talk. It's hosted by Black female professional and a brown woman professional, South Asian. And they just talk about the realities of being a woman of color in the workplace. Also, if you are any leadership, white man, I'm just saying, definitely listen into that. It's a validation of experiences. And going back to what Amber said about this knowledge share, there is like great content on LinkedIn that you can just start to follow all of these thought leaders. Just great ways to get that perspective. Oh, and another for women of color, Sisters in Sales. I think that's another organization that's available for people to join too.
That's awesome. Thanks for all those resources. I need to make sure I need to write those down. So the next question is, how do I, being from an underrepresented group, promote myself as a leader and establish myself in those non-diverse rooms without being looked at through the diversity lens?
It's an awkward question. I mean, just answering it, I'm a little uncomfortable, but you kind of gotta just bite that bullet, so to speak, and jump in and ask for things. It can be really challenging. I know my experience as a woman, it can be really challenging to brag about the things that I've done, share with my leadership team, especially, and say, you know, hey, I've done this really cool thing, or be aware of this awesome achievement that I had. But that really helps to establish your credibility. And I feel like sharing those things and facing that discomfort head on, and making sure that especially your own leadership team, but your larger leadership team at your company in general, make sure that they know and they have awareness of the great things that you're doing every day, because it's so easy to get lost in your own bubble. And then it gets harder and harder to let everybody know how amazing you are. And then once that perception starts, once it's, hey, this person is amazing, and it becomes less about this insert group here is amazing. It's just this person is amazing, because the achievements sort of take precedent, if that makes sense.
I think something that's interesting about this question also just highlights a reality, right, that marginalized groups face is, again, people will look at me and they're already like, well, she's a brown woman. There's almost like that inherent power struggle of like, I have multiple identities. Like, I'm a daughter of immigrants. I like anime. I love sports, but that's not what people see. So just the fact that the way that this question was posed, it is 100% a reality. I think on your journey, it's kind of saying, do you feel like, what's comfortable for you? Do you need that support maybe from a colleague, right, that can kind of champion you, or from a manager? Don't put that burden on yourself. That's just the one thing. But for me, it's all about thriving. It's being 100% yourself, or even just reminding people, it's like, I am more than, this title, right? I just want to hype you up wherever, like, whoever answered that question, like, all these great things that are probably amazing about you.
Yeah, to that point, something that Ash had mentioned earlier, which comes to mind for this, is the difference between mentorship and sponsorship or advocacy, this is way easier said than done, but it's looking for or being aware of who your sponsors or potential sponsors are. And then, and oftentimes those won't be your mentors. And those are the people that I think can help to break through some of this, which is, by the way, good advice for anyone that's looking to grow in their careers, but I think in particular in this context.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking these questions. We are very close to the end of our webinar time. So I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time, both to the panelists and to everybody who's joined. We've got one additional poll, which is just, we want to know how we did today. If you just give us an idea of how this, if this is a good use of your time, et cetera. Again, this just helps us create better and the most valuable events that we can. And also, if you haven't joined us on Slack, please do. There's over 9,000 people in this thriving Slack environment. It is really awesome to get to reach out. There are spaces specifically for diversity, equity, equality, and inclusion where we continue to have these conversations. There are also spaces for sort of your geo area, for your general interest. There's lots of ways to network and it's just generally just become part of the PreSales Collective. So please take the time to join us if you can. And we will look forward to seeing you next time. Again, thank you to everybody who's come. Thank you to the guests. You are all absolutely amazing. And I am looking forward to making this change in the industry with everybody.